Let me take you back 3 months, to a time when I still trusted the world in my Norfolk town. Thetford, in Norfolk, was never a place people chose to move to. It was the last stop for those who had run out of options. 24,000 people live here, tucked between Cambridge and the East Anglian Hills. There are a few traffic lights, 3 Anglican churches. And the A11 cuts straight through, so that every lorry driver doing the London-Norwich run will stop here at least once in his life for a coffee. My father, Peter Davies, was one of those drivers, for 31 years. My mother, Diana Davies, worked the early breakfast shift at the Thetford family diner from 1985 until 2018. When her knees finally gave out. Everyone knows everyone in a town like this, which meant that whatever happened at my parents' house on Easter Sunday would sooner or later be known by the whole village. But back in January 2026, I still thought that the life we were living was the one we had chosen. On a Tuesday morning at 6, I finished my night shift at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge and drove the 12 miles back through the still dark East Anglian Hills. By the time I turned into our driveway, the first light was just beginning to show above the tree line. The light in the workshop was already on. Oliver had been out there since 4. A Charolais cow on a farm off the B1101 was having trouble calving. And he'd promised the farmer he'd be there by 7. My husband, Oliver Baker, is a large animal vet. His schedule belongs to a different age, it might as well be 1962. He also has one rule that I've come to trust more than any other: he never explains himself twice. I kicked off my shoes in the mudroom and heard his voice from the workshop. Coffee's still hot, Ella's lunch is on the counter, she wants the pink flask. That was our whole conversation. On many mornings, we don't even get that much. Ella is 6, born in January 2020, just before the world turned upside down. When she came out, her hair was a fine, pale gold that looked almost silver under the delivery room lights. Oliver's hair is dark brown, mine is chestnut. His family is Irish redhead stock, mine is solid German farming stock. Neither of us expected a blonde child. Except for one thing. My great-grandfather Henry Boyd came over from a Hamburg slaughterhouse in 1923 and kept his blonde hair until he was 50. That hidden gene skipped my grandfather, skipped my father, and landed on my daughter 3 generations later. In her second week, the pediatrician, Dr. Carter, looked at Ella, scanned her notes, then turned to me. Any blondes on either side of the family? I told her about great-grandfather Henry. She nodded, scribbled a note, and moved on. After that, I didn't give my daughter's hair color another thought for 4 whole years. What made me notice it again was Christmas 2025. On Christmas Eve we went to my parents' house, a 5-minute walk down the lanes. Thetford's back lanes criss-cross the town so you can get almost anywhere without touching the main road. My mother made her casserole, the same one she's made every Christmas Eve for as long as I can remember. My father was in his armchair watching the rugby league. My sister Fiona arrived with a carrier bag full of wrapped gifts and a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon from the Tesco on Sun Lane. She kissed my mother's cheek, didn't look at me once, and fixed her eyes on Ella. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, taking Ella's hand. "Let's get you all pretty for Grandma's family photo." She took my daughter upstairs to the guest bathroom that used to be her bedroom. My mother asked me to stay in the kitchen and whisk the eggs for the noodle dish, so I didn't follow, it didn't even cross my mind to. For 2 years, at every family gathering, it was Fiona who did Ella's hair. It was the only kind gesture she ever made towards my daughter, and I was stupid enough to take that at face value. 5 minutes later she came down, Ella's hair tied with a red ribbon. Fiona put the little pink Elsa hairbrush that Ella adored back on the counter, wiped her hands on a dish towel, as if she'd just finished a tricky job. That whole evening, for the first time, she smiled at me and said, "Now she looks properly Christmassy." I said, "Thank you." It was the last kind word I ever said to my sister. 3 months later, the few strands left on that Elsa brush would be sent to a testing lab in Cambridge, and a DNA report in a manila envelope would be printing. But before I tell you about the Easter drama, you need to understand what 35 years in this family had made of me. If you don't get that, you'll just think I was slow on the day. I wasn't slow. I'd just been taught to endure. I was born in September 1990, 21 months after Fiona. From the day I was brought home from the Royal Suffolk Hospital, our roles were set. She was the one who was baptized early, photographed endlessly, carefully chronicled. Uncle Andrew even picked out a stuffed rabbit for her. I was the extra daughter. Loved, tolerated, but never the star of the story. As long as I can remember, my father was on the road for 20 days out of every 30, hauling tuna to London and back. When he was home, his attention was all on Fiona. Her drawings covered the fridge. He took her and Uncle Andrew fishing in the Norfolk Broads. Uncle Andrew had all the time in the world for her, but none for me. When I was 6, I plucked up the courage to ask if I could come along too. But that's all in the past. Now, on Easter Sunday, at the dining table, Fiona slid that DNA report across to Oliver. The smile on her face was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years. Not think, Hannah, I know, she said. That blonde hair of Ella's doesn't match Oliver at all. You've lied to him for 6 years. Today, everyone finally gets to see exactly what kind of woman you are. She always fancied herself the truly favored child, and now she was gloating, as if she'd just destroyed my life. But she had no idea that the bomb she'd brought was never aimed at me, it was aimed at herself. When Oliver turned to page 4, the truth she'd hidden for 38 years would land squarely on her own face. I am Hannah Davies. If you want, come with me and watch this long overdue reckoning. Oliver turned to page 4, and the only sound in the dining room was the ticking of the wall clock. My father had stopped carving the turkey, his knife and fork suspended mid-air. My mother gripped her napkin, knuckles white. Fiona leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, that smile fixed on her face like a mask. I watched Oliver's profile. I know how he reads reports. He scans the title, jumps to the conclusion, then flips back to the data to verify. Over 6 years, I've watched him go through thousands of blood panels for livestock, always in that order. This time, when he reached page 4, his pupils contracted sharply. Then he looked up, not at me. At Fiona. You. Oliver's voice was barely audible. He laid the report flat on the table and tapped his index finger on the bold line in the middle of page 4. Have you actually read this page yourself? Fiona's smile froze for half a second. Whether I've read it or not doesn't matter, she said, lifting her wine glass for a sip. What matters is that Hannah has deceived you for 6 years. Ella's blonde hair. Ella's blonde hair comes from her great-grandfather Henry. Oliver cut her off, his tone as matter-of-fact as if he were stating a cow's breeding lineage. The allele comparison on page 3 is perfectly clear. Hannah's and my genetic markers on the autosomes match completely. The child is ours. Your so-called evidence only proves that you failed high school biology. Fiona's wine glass paused mid-air. My husband was never a man of many words, but every one he spoke landed like a nail driven into wood. He turned back to page 4, rotated the report, and pushed it back to Fiona. Instead of worrying about my paternity, you might want to look at this column, kinship analysis between samples. Sample C and Sample D. Sample C was the hair Fiona had secretly pulled from my daughter's brush. Sample D was her own cheek swab. She'd submitted her own DNA as a baseline, to be thorough. Fiona looked down. I watched the color drain from her face in 5 seconds, leaving even her lips pale. What does this mean? Her voice trembled. Paternal exclusion, what does that mean? My mother's napkin fell to the floor. My father slowly set down his knife and fork. The expression on his face was one I'd seen only once before in 35 years. When I was 6, he came back from a long haul to find our old retriever dead in his kennel. That was the only time he'd ever let his eyes go red in front of me. Fiona, Peter said, his voice as rough as sandpaper on iron, your mother has something to tell you. I took a sip of my iced water. My fingers were cold, but my palms were hot. 3 months earlier, when I'd mailed the strands from that Elsa brush along with the disposable toothbrush Fiona had carelessly left on my parents' bathroom counter to the Cambridge lab, I hadn't known what the results would show. I only knew one thing. My sister's over-eager auntie attention to my daughter was never pure goodwill. She was looking for evidence to nail me to the cross of shame. So I ran the full panel, including her own sample. The lab report arrived on the 12th of March. I sat on the fold-down bed in the hospital staff room and opened the envelope. When I read page 4, I neither cried nor laughed. I just folded it back, sealed it, locked it in my locker, and went back to my rounds. Driving home that night through the black East Anglian hills, I had only one thought. On Easter Sunday, I would be sitting at that table, watching her smile shatter. It happened even more quietly than I'd imagined. My mother finally spoke. She didn't look at Fiona or my father, she stared at the golden Yorkshire pudding in the center of the table, as if it were the last real thing she could hold on to. "The year you were born," she said, 1988, February. Peter was on that Glasgow run. The M6 was snowed in and he was stuck in Birmingham for 4 days. I was home alone when the contractions came 3 weeks early. Fiona shot up, her chair scraping across the floor with a screech. "I don't want to hear it." Her voice was shrill, not her own. "You're all in on this." Hannah forged that report. She bribed the lab. Bribed the University of Cambridge Genetics Testing Centre? Oliver interjected, calm as ever. He flipped the report back to the cover and pointed to the embossed seal and certification number. "You can look up that lab's accreditation on the Ministry of Justice website. The penalty for forging a judicial document, you know it better than I do." Fiona opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My mother finally lifted her gaze. She looked at Fiona, her eyes red, but not a single tear fell. I know my mother. She's the kind of woman who worked the early shift in a diner kitchen for 33 years, her knees swollen like bread rolls, yet still flipped every fried egg to perfection. She wouldn't cry, at least not at the dinner table. "The man was called Michael," my mother said, her voice dry as November straw. "He came to town that winter to repair the church organ. He stayed in Thetford for 6 weeks. After you were born, he sent 2 letters. I never opened them. I burned them straight away. Your father, Peter, he didn't make it back from Glasgow until the 3rd day. When he got to the hospital, you were already in my arms. He looked at your hair, that light reddish brown, and he never asked a thing. My father lifted his cup of cold tea, took a sip, and set it down. I asked you once," he said, looking at Fiona with a weariness I'd never seen before. "When you were 16, filling out your university application, you came to me and asked why your birth certificate said Ipswich instead of Thetford. I told you it was because your mother was at her parents' place in Ipswich when she went into labor. You believed me." Fiona stood there, as if all her bones had been pulled out. "I believed you." She repeated the words like a ghost. Then she turned abruptly, grabbed her handbag and the half-finished bottle of Cabernet, and stumbled out of the dining room. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. The table was silent. Ella, my daughter, hopped off her little stool and tugged my sleeve. "Mummy, why did Auntie go?" "She didn't do my hair." I lifted Ella onto my knee and tucked her wispy pale gold strands behind her ears. "Auntie's not feeling very well today," I said. "Shall Mummy do your hair instead?" Ella nodded and pulled the little pink Elsa brush from her pocket. She always carried it with her. Fiona had given it to her. A wave of conflicting emotion washed over me. Hatred? Yes, a little. But more than that, a cold, clear understanding. Oliver stood up, tucked the report into his jacket's inside pocket, and came over. He bent to kiss the top of Ella's head, then murmured in my ear, "You knew." Not a question. I turned my head to look at him. There was no anger in his eyes, no hurt of betrayal. He simply waited. "I knew she wasn't yours," I said. "But I didn't know she'd use Ella to stab me. After the March report came back, I meant to tell you. But you were waiting for today." Oliver finished my sentence. I didn't deny it. He paused for a moment, then reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "Next time," he said, "you can tell me beforehand. We can read the report together." It was as light as a feather, but it crushed the stone that had been pressing on my chest for 3 months. I dropped my head into Ella's hair, smelling her strawberry shampoo. My nose burned, but I wouldn't let myself cry. My mother began clearing plates. She put Fiona's unused knife into the sink, then turned for the roasting pan. My father quietly walked up behind her and rested his hand on her shoulder. Neither spoke, but I'd seen that gesture 1,000 times. Every time my mother was about to break, over 35 years, that's what he did. That night, back home, Ella had fallen asleep on Oliver's shoulder. I tucked her in, then returned to the living room. Oliver sat in the old armchair by the fireplace, reading the full report. "So when did you first suspect?" He didn't look up. I leaned against the doorframe and thought. Not suspect. When I was 12, Mum took me to Ipswich to see Grandma. Grandma had had too much sherry and she said, "Your sister looks just like that Hamilton man." I thought she meant some distant relative on Mum's side. Later, when I was older, I checked the birth register. Fiona's birth certificate had no father listed. And before Grandma died, in the nursing home, she kept repeating one name, Michael Hamilton. Oliver closed the report. "You carried that for 23 years. "I carried it for my father's dignity," I said. The thing he was proudest of was that everyone called him the most reliable man in Thetford. He raised another man's daughter for 38 years and never complained. I've seen too many families in hospital, men's pride shattered by DNA tests. But not my dad. When he saw Fiona's light reddish-brown hair, he knew everything, and he chose silence. Oliver stood and came over. He's a head taller than me. When he bent to look at me, the firelight flickered across his face. "And you?" he asked. "You chose to get back at her the same way." I looked up at him. "She went after my child." I said it very softly. Oliver didn't ask again. Over the next 2 weeks, Thetford was like a pot of stew that had been stirred too hard. First, Mrs. Philpott at the post office told anyone who'd listened that she'd seen Fiona drive out of our place on Easter Sunday, crying, with her wing mirror knocked askew. Then Reverend Bennett, in his Sunday sermon, quoted Matthew, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." At least 20 people in the congregation exchanged knowing glances. And then Fiona herself. She took 2 weeks sick leave from her accounting job, but on the third evening, someone spotted her sitting on a bench in the churchyard with a bottle of whiskey, staring at a name she thought she'd long forgotten. Michael Hamilton's grave wasn't there. He'd gone back to Scotland in 1989, later set up an organ repair workshop near Aberdeen, lived to 62, and died 2 years earlier. Fiona would never meet her birth father. I heard all this from my mother. 5 days after Easter, she called and asked me to come over after work. When I arrived, my father was in the garage fixing his old Ford, deliberately leaving us space. My mother sat at the old oak table in the kitchen, 2 cups of tea in front of us, one for me, one gone cold. "Fiona came to see me," she said without preamble. She cried for 2 days, stopped on the third, and started digging into Michael Hamilton's life. She asked why I never told her earlier. I looked at my mother. She wasn't wearing her work clothes. She'd put on a clean floral blouse and had done her hair carefully. That was rare, a deliberate solemnity. "How did you explain it to her?" I asked. My mother took a sip of the cold tea, grimaced, and set it down. "I didn't explain. I told her, your Aunt Margaret wanted me to terminate the pregnancy, but I refused. You are my child, from the day you were born. Peter didn't ask because he'd already decided to be your father. You're asking because you think you've been lied to. But Fiona, some truths don't exist to make you feel better. You chose to lift that stone, you have to swallow the insects underneath." I was silent for a moment. Did she accept that? My mother shook her head. She asked me, if Dad hadn't taken that Glasgow run, if he'd been home, would she still have been a bastard? I told her, there are no IFS. Your grandmother delivered you in Ipswich while your father was 300 miles away shoveling snow. He didn't make it back, but he never blamed a soul. I held my cup, the warmth seeping through my fingers. "Mum," I said, "I actually knew when I was 12. My mother looked up. Her eyes, faintly yellowed from 3 decades of diner grease, held no surprise, only a kind of I knew it resignation. "I knew you'd find out sooner or later," she said. "You were always more observant than your sister. And your grandmother, 2 glasses of sherry and she couldn't keep a thing to herself. Then why did you never tell me?" My mother poured the cold tea down the sink and put the kettle on. The sound of water boiling filled the brief silence. She spoke with her back. B1101 shone silver-grey in the moonlight, and now and then a hair darted through the beam of my headlights. In the rear-view mirror, I watched the roofline of my parents' house shrink. I'd lived there 18 years, the red brick had faded to a dark brown, and ivy covered the chimney. When Fiona had run out that door, what I'd heard was the snap of a string that had been taut for 38 years. But I felt no satisfaction. None at all. I thought of when I was 6, tugging on Uncle Richard's trouser leg and asking if he'd take me fishing. He looked down and said, "You're too small, you'd be in the way." Later, my father came out of the house, hoisted me onto his shoulders, and carried me to the canal behind the town, and we sat there all afternoon. He didn't catch a thing. I scooped tadpoles into a glass jar from the bank. When we got home, he put the jar on top of the fridge, saying we'd release them when they grew legs. Those tadpoles never grew legs. Mum thought they were in the way and flushed them down the sink on the 3rd day. But I remember that afternoon, my father's shoulders, his neck tanned dark brown, and me counting the sweat stains on his shirt collar as I lay on his shoulder, falling asleep at number 17. He'd carried so many things for me, more than I could count. Keeping that secret for him until today, that was my way of repaying him. The Sunday after Easter, Reverend Bennett actually turned up on our doorstep. He hadn't called first, he just appeared on the porch, wearing a faded grey sweater and holding a worn-out Bible. I happened to be off that afternoon, hanging laundry in the back garden, and I saw him through the kitchen window, standing at the gate like a postman who'd taken the wrong turn. I opened the door. He gave me that priestly smile, both compassionate and unsettling. "Hannah," he said, "could I sit with you for 5 minutes?" I stepped aside. Oliver was in the back workshop repairing an old centrifuge, its hum covering our voices. I poured Bennett a cup of tea. He didn't drink it, just turned it in his hands. "Last Sunday's sermon," he began, "I mentioned not judging others. Someone came to me afterward and said they thought I was defending Fiona. I didn't think that," I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "I just thought you chose that passage at that particular time for a reason." Bennett didn't deny it. He looked at his own fingers, covered with the thin calluses of years of turning pages. "Fiona came to me," he said. "She knelt in the front pew and wept for an hour. She said she'd never known who she was, and that knowledge felt worse than dying. Hannah, she did wrong, using your daughter as a weapon, that was wrong. But she's paid a price. She lost the foundation she thought was hers. And my daughter?" I asked. "Ella is 6. All she knows is that her aunt suddenly stopped coming round. When she asks me, what do I say? Because your aunt wanted to prove you're not your father's biological child? Would she even understand?" Bennett was quiet for a moment. "That's why I came, not to plead for Fiona, but to ask you, are you willing to let time heal this wound?" I met his eyes. "Time doesn't heal wounds, Reverend. Time only teaches you how to live with them. That's what I'm learning now." He nodded, didn't press further. Before he left the Bible on the hallside table, saying my mother had copied a passage on the flyleaf when she joined the church. I opened it and saw my mother Diana's handwriting, wobbly cursive, "Love is patient, love is kind." I closed it and put it in the back of the kitchen drawer. After that, the town's mood shifted subtly. First, Oliver got cornered at the petrol station on the east side of town. He was filling up the pickup when he ran into Jason Harper, Fiona's former colleague from the accounting firm. Harper, a loud-voiced middle-aged man, sidled up to Oliver and asked, half curious, half stirring, "Hey, Oliver, your wife ruined your sister, you sleeping all right at night?" Oliver hung up the pump and turned to Harper. I know that look. He wasn't angry, he was calculating. Calculating the fewest words to shut the man down. "My wife showed me a legal DNA report," Oliver said. "What you're calling ruined was done by that report, not by her. Next time you spread gossip, get your facts straight first." Harper's mouth twitched, he had no comeback. Before climbing back into the truck, Oliver added, "And by the way, is she my sister?" Page 4 of that report makes it quite clear. That line was all over town by the afternoon. People suddenly saw a different angle. Fiona had tried to frame Hannah, But the one whose wound was reopened was Fiona herself. Oliver's casual "is she my sister" became the turning point. From then on, some started speaking up for Hannah at the post office and the corner shop. Fiona was always too competitive, she brought this on herself. Hannah kept her cool for years. If it were me, I'd have spilled it when I was 16. I never sought out the gossip, but Thetford is tiny. Even a trip to Tesco tells you the three-way temperature of public opinion from the cashier's glance. I didn't lean into it or avoid it. I worked, I picked up my child. What actually loosened something in me came on an ordinary Wednesday evening in late April. I'd left work early to collect Ella from Thetford Primary. She ran out with her pink backpack, her hair half undone, her elastic band missing. I knelt to redo it, and she whispered in my ear, "Mummy, today Millie asked me why your auntie isn't your real auntie." My fingers paused. "What did you tell her?" I said my auntie is my auntie. She's Mummy's sister. Ella tilted her head. Right. I looked into her pale grey eyes, Oliver's eyes, and saw the uncomplicated certainty only a 6-year-old has. I nodded. Right. She's your auntie, and she always will be. Ella beamed, took my hand, and led me towards the car. I glanced back at the beech trees along the playground, their leaves already fully green, an April breeze carrying the scent of cut grass, stinging my eyes. That night, after Ella was asleep, Oliver came in from the workshop. His hands still had traces of cattle-shed mud, he was washing them at the kitchen sink. I watched his back, the broad shoulders, the slightly misshapen shoulder blades from years of lifting heavy livestock. He finished and turned. "What are you looking at?" "I was thinking about what you said to Harper at the petrol station." Oliver turned off the tap and shook the water from his hands. "Which bit?" "The is she my sister bit." I walked over and leaned on the other side of the sink, half a step away. "Did you say that on purpose, or did you really mean it?" He paused, then dried his hands slowly on a towel. "The first time I met your sister, it was our second date, you took me to your parents for dinner. She sat across the table and never once looked directly at you. But when your mother passed you a dish of pudding, the look on her face, I saw it once and never forgot. It's the look of someone who feels she's always being compared. So I always knew she didn't like you. I just didn't think that dislike would ferment into a DNA test. At the petrol station, when Harper said your wife ruined your sister, my first thought was, my wife didn't ruin her. She fell into a hole she'd dug herself." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear, the same gesture he'd made at the Easter table. "Also," he added, when I flipped to page 4 at the table, "the first thing I saw wasn't Fiona's exclusion, it was the matching data between you and Ella. I checked it once, twice, 3 times. Hannah, before you did all this, did you never consider that I might doubt you?" I was caught off guard. I really hadn't. I'd spent 3 months rehearsing how to make Fiona eat her own words, but I'd never once calculated what Oliver might feel seeing those first pages. When he saw subject, Ella Baker, control, Hannah Davies, what had gone through his mind? I started, my voice raspier than I expected. "At the time, I thought this was between me and my sister. You didn't need to be dragged into it." Oliver tossed the towel into the sink, braced his hands on the counter, and looked down at the tap. "You had my child, you run this house, you get up at 4:30 for night shifts and still come home and make Ella's lunch, and you say this has nothing to do with me." His voice never rose, but the weight of it sank like a stone into deep water. "The day we got married, at the church door, your father patted me on the shoulder and said, 'From now on, this family's business is both of yours. Remember?'" I remembered. That day Peter wore his one navy suit, the tie crooked, fixed by my mother. When he patted Oliver's shoulder, his hand was trembling. "My father carried too much all his life," I said. "I grew up thinking I should carry my own load and not burden anyone else." Oliver straightened and turned to face me. He was a full head taller, and the kitchen pendant light cast a halo behind him. "I'm not someone else," he said. "Next time you can't bear it, lean sideways and let me take some of the weight." We didn't mention Fiona again that night. I sat on the edge of the bed drying my hair. Oliver leaned against the headboard reading a livestock journal, Ella's even breathing came from the next room. The house was so quiet I could hear the old oak's leaves scraping in the wind. In the first week of May, my mother Diana called to say Fiona had formally resigned from the accounting firm and given up her flat in Thetford. She'd moved into Grandma's old house in Ipswich, planning to stay there temporarily. Mum said Fiona had come back to our parents' house before leaving, but hadn't come inside, just stood by the back garden, near the vegetable patch, and spoke through the screen door for a moment. "What did she say?" I asked on the phone. My mother paused. She said, "Mum, you always told me I was the smartest one in the family, so I thought I had to do something to prove I wasn't a failure. Now I don't want to prove anything anymore." Then she left. I held the phone, leaning against the staff room wall. Outside was the May dusk, the sky above Cambridge burning orange. I closed my eyes and imagined Fiona standing by our bin trellis. She'd probably worn her old trench coat, her hair unkempt. Was she carrying that bottle of Cabernet? I couldn't remember. "Mum," I said, "will she come back?" "Coming back is her road," my mother said. "But remember, that door is never locked." I hung up, pocketed the phone, and went back to my rounds. By mid-May, I started seriously considering the trip to the Scottish Highlands that Oliver had mentioned. Ella was about to break for summer, I could request a week off, and Oliver could get a newly qualified vet to cover emergencies. I'd hesitated, thinking that with the family turmoil, leaving would feel wrong, but Oliver said one thing that changed my mind. "You've been worrying about everyone else since you were 12. Now you're 35, can you once worry about yourself?" I agreed. At the end of June, we packed the car. Ella sat in the back with her pink Elsa brush and a plush sheep, and we headed north. The A11 cut through the flat East Anglian fields, past Peterborough where the landscape began to rise, and the sky grew wider the farther north we went. Oliver didn't talk much while driving, but now and then he reached over and squeezed my hand on the passenger seat for a few seconds, a quiet signal. Ella sang nursery rhymes in the back, then stopped and asked, "Mummy, when we come back, will Auntie live at Grandma's?" I turned to look at her from the passenger seat. "Probably not, but she'll live somewhere not too far from Grandma." "Will she still do my hair?" I saw her in the rear-view mirror, head tilted, waiting. The question carried more weight than my light answer suggested. I thought for a moment, then said as evenly as I could, "If you want, you can ask her yourself next time you see her." Ella nodded, as if that settled it, and went back to her song. Oliver glanced at me, his mouth twitching, but said nothing, only held my hand a little tighter. As we passed the Glasgow Ring Road, dusk began to fall. The Scottish Highlands materialized in the distance, their ridges blue-grey in the fading light. I wound down the window, the cold air poured in, smelling of moss and earth. Ella had fallen asleep, her head lolled to one side, pale gold wisps stuck to her cheek. I gazed out at the landscape and suddenly remembered being 12, when Grandma in Ipswich, drunk on sherry, had gripped my hand and said, "Your sister looks just like that Hamilton man." Then she'd passed out on the table, snoring. That afternoon I sat on her back garden swing for a long time, those words echoing. I knew it was a secret, one I wasn't supposed to uncover. I swallowed it and held it for 23 years. Now I'd spat it out. On the Easter table, in front of Fiona, in front of all Thetford. I'd thought spitting it out would bring relief, but sitting in the car racing north, I realized, the relief wasn't the secret itself, it was that I'd finally stopped being the little girl keeping it alone. Oliver said quietly, "Nearly there, the Lakeside Hotel is about 40 miles away." "No rush," I said. "Drive slowly. I want to see the road." The heather was in full bloom on both sides, a carpet of tiny purple flowers covering the hills. In the distance, sheep moved in the twilight like shifting clouds. Ella stirred in the back, mumbled something about a calf on a farm. I didn't turn to look at her. But in the reflection of the car window, I saw my own face, and for the first time in years, the expression wasn't endurance. It was peace. And peace, I suppose, was the best gift I could give to my 35-year-old self. The hotel sat at the end of a narrow lane on the east shore of Loch Lomond, almost swallowed by weeds, a 3-story grey stone building with dark ivy crawling up the corners. We arrived at 9 that night, only a warm yellow lamp was lit at reception, and the elderly woman on duty hung our key on a wooden rack and smiled, saying our room was on the second floor, with a window facing the water. Ella was asleep on Oliver's shoulder, a dried drool stain on her chin. I carried the bags as we climbed the creaking wooden stairs. The room was larger than I'd expected, 2 beds, a wide window with no curtains, and the ink-blue lake glittering with silver fragments in the moonlight. Oliver laid Ella on the inner bed, bent to remove her shoes and socks, and pulled the duvet to her chest. He did it with practiced quietness, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. I stood by the window, looking at the dark mountain silhouettes on the opposite shore. The heat of the day had faded, a cool night breeze leaked through the window gap, carrying the sweet sour smell of water weed. Oliver came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. Tired? No, I said. It's just so quiet here. Tomorrow you'll see swans on the loch, he said. I checked. There's a path that goes down to the heatherfield at the foot of the hills. I held his hands around my waist, my thumb tracing the calluses on his knuckles, worn from years of gripping syringes and forceps. We stood there in silence for a few minutes, watching the loch, then washed up and lay in our separate beds. Ella woke in the middle of the night and crawled into my bed, burrowing under the duvet. Her fuzzy head woke me. I opened my eyes to see moonlight pouring through the window, catching her pale gold hair, bathing the whole room in a pale silver. I pulled the duvet around her, listened to her breathing steady, and closed my eyes again. The next morning, I woke to birdsong. When I pushed open the window, 2 swans floated on the loch, so white they looked like snowballs set on dark blue silk. Ella was already awake, pressing her face against the screen, gasping. Oliver wasn't in the room, his bed was made, and a note lay on the bedside table. Gone to town for breakfast, back in 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes I did Ella's hair and helped her dress. She wore her strawberry print t-shirt and twirled around the room, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the bed watching her spin in the morning light, and felt the tightness in my chest begin to ease, inch by inch. Oliver returned with a bag of hot scones and 2 coffees. We ate breakfast on the terrace by the loch. Ella sat on the stone railing, swinging her legs, crumbling scone for the swans. A mist lay on the water, and the mountains opposite showed only a pale blue silhouette through the haze. The air was crisp and clean, like drinking iced water. "Where do you want to go today?" Oliver asked, coffee in hand. "That path you mentioned, to the heatherfield." He nodded and reached out his hand. I took it and stood. Ella jumped down and ran ahead, her small feet crunching on the gravel. The path ran along the loch shore for about 2 miles, then turned east and climbed a gentle slope. The wind was fiercer here than down below, blowing Ella's hair into a pale gold dandelion puff. When she tired, she stopped to look at the wildflowers growing from rock crevices, or chased a stream for a few dozen yards before running back. Oliver and I walked side by side, our pace unhurried, as if we could keep going forever. At the top, the heather field opened without warning, a rolling sea of purple flowers stretching to the horizon, the wind making it ripple like silk. Ella shrieked and ran into the purple, her small figure quickly swallowed. Oliver stood beside me, his coat over his arm, watching her with a small smile. "You never told me," he said suddenly, "that you knew when you were 12. For 23 years, every Christmas, you looked at Fiona and thought about that." I pursed my lips. "Not constantly. For years I didn't think about it at all. It was like an old cloth at the bottom of a drawer. I knew it was there, but I didn't dig it out every day. I started thinking about it again when she began to get close to Ella." "When did that start?" "When Ella was 2, I said. She suddenly offered to help with the babysitting. At every family gathering she'd insist on doing Ella's hair. At the time I was grateful. I thought she'd finally warmed to my daughter. Looking back, she'd been collecting those strands all along." Oliver was quiet for a moment. "When Ella was 2, she was 6. He counted on his fingers. So Fiona was 34. She'd been nursing that thought for at least 4 years. "Yes," I said. 4 years. Every time she brushed Ella's hair, she was saving those strands. The wind swept across the field, lifting Oliver's shirt tail. He turned to me, his silhouette rimmed with soft gold in the backlight. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Pushing that report across the table? I thought for a long time, until Ella came running out of the heather, clutching a fistful of crushed purple blossoms, heading for us, until a brown hair darted past her feet, startling her so that she dropped the flowers. "No," I said at last. "I didn't do it to destroy her. I did it to make her stop." Ella threw herself against my legs, looking up, offering me the few blooms still in her palm. I knelt, took them, and tucked them behind her ear, next to her hair tie. The purple against the gold was so lovely it made my chest ache. That afternoon, back at the hotel, Ella had a long nap. I sat by the window staring at the lock. Oliver borrowed a fishing rod from the hotel and fished for a while, catching nothing. After dinner, Ella was full of energy and insisted on seeing the swans again. Oliver took her. I stayed behind and walked alone to the small wood behind the hotel. The evening light cast long shadows from the trees. I found a flat stone under a crooked pine, facing the lock, and sat down. The wood was still, except for the whisper of wind through needles and the distant call of waterbirds. I sat for perhaps 10 minutes, and then, without warning, the tears came. Not sobbing, very quiet tears, quiet enough to hear them hit my hand. I thought of Grandma's drunken words when I was 12, of the letters my mother burned, of my father's silent silhouette by the back garden, of every look Fiona had ever given me, that appraising, competitive, never relaxed gaze. And the delivery room when Ella was born, the nurse wiping her clean and laying her on my chest, her pale gold fuzz of hair, her eyes still shut, her tiny fists clenched. I cried for about 20 minutes under that crooked pine, soaking a patch of my jeans. Then I wiped my face, stood up, brushed the dirt from my trousers, took a deep breath of the cool Highlands evening, and walked back to the hotel. Ella and Oliver were back. Ella was lying on the bed, drawing, a purple field and 2 fat swans. Oliver was on the foot of the bed, reading. He looked up as I came in, his gaze lingering on my face for a couple of seconds, but he didn't ask. He just shifted to the side and patted the mattress. I sat beside him, leaned my head on his shoulder, and closed my eyes. The lapping of the lock came through the window, like someone far away turning the pages of a giant book. We stayed in Scotland for 6 days. Every day was the same rhythm: wake to the lock, walk, eat, nap, walk again. No television, no phones, except one call to my mother to say we were fine. Ella's skin darkened a shade. Oliver taught her to recognize 4 different leaf shapes under the old oak by the hotel entrance. I finished a paperback I'd been meaning to read for ages, and when I closed it, I left it on the hotel shelf for the next guest. On the 7th morning, we packed, returned the key to the lady at reception. She waved from the doorstep, saying we should come again next year. Ella, strapped in the back with her worn Elsa brush, asked when we'd see the swans again. Oliver said next time, we'd bring a tent and camp. The car turned south, back towards home. In the rear-view mirror I watched the grey stone hotel shrink and finally disappear behind a curve of trees. The heather fields of the Highlands fell away. The scenery returned to the wide, flat East Anglian farmland. I didn't look back again. The string that had been taut for 23 years, this time, it was truly released. July in Thetford was unseasonably hot, the lawn bleached white, the beech trees in the town centre wilting. The day after we got back, I reported for my new shift pattern. Ella started summer play scheme. Oliver climbed back into his old Ford pickup and shuttled between the surrounding farms. Life looked the same as before. But some things had changed. I no longer unconsciously avoided the street with the accounting firm when I went to Tesco. At Monday family dinners at my mother's, the table now had 4 places, and I no longer felt that the empty chair was a gap that needed filling. When Ella mentioned Fiona, her tone was no different than if she were talking about any ordinary relative. On a Saturday in mid-July, my mother called to say Fiona was back. Not back in Thetford, she was still in the Ipswich house, but she'd come to collect some old things from the attic. Would I come over? I said yes. That afternoon I left Ella with a neighbor and drove to my parents'. When I walked in, Fiona was standing in the living room, a cardboard box at her feet containing a few old photo albums and some knick-knacks. She'd lost weight since Easter, her cheekbones stood out more, and she'd cut her hair short, just below her ears, left undyed, revealing the natural reddish-brown roots. When she saw me, her shoulders stiffened for a moment. My mother popped her head out of the kitchen, looked at us both, said nothing, and ducked back inside. I walked to the table and set down my keys. "Need a hand?" Fiona didn't meet my eyes. She looked down at the box, fiddling with the cover of an album. "No, this is it. I'll be done soon." "Have you eaten?" I asked. She paused. "No." I tipped my head towards the kitchen. "Mum's made beef stew, there's enough for 3. Fiona looked up. Her gaze was different from before. Once it had been full of calculation, weighing, competition. That day it held nothing. No guilt, no anger, no pleading, no demand. She just looked at me, like someone she'd known too long. "Hannah," she said, you don't have to pretend nothing happened." "I'm not pretending." I pulled out a chair and sat down. "I'm hungry, you're hungry, Mum's stew smells good. Are you eating or not?" She stood there for a few seconds, then pushed the box to the wall, dragged out the opposite chair, and sat a. My mother came out with the casserole dish and set it in the center of the table. When she lifted the lid, steam rose, carrying the rich aroma of beef braised with carrots and red wine. The 3 of us ate at that old oak table. Fiona said little. My mother didn't press. As I chewed a piece of beef, I saw in the window's reflection Fiona lowering her spoon to her soup. She held the bowl the same way she always had, both hands cupping it tightly, as if afraid it would slip through her fingers. Before I left, as I was lacing my shoes in the hall, Fiona called from the living room doorway. "Hannah." I turned. She opened her mouth, her lips moving twice before the words came. "That brush, Ella's brush, if keeping it makes you uncomfortable, throw it away." I didn't. "She still uses it," I cut in. "She likes it. Ella has no problem with that brush." Fiona's lips trembled. She dropped her eyes and nodded. I pushed open the door and walked into the July twilight. Heat enveloped me. The wheat stubble in the fields was gilded by the low sun. I walked along the gravel path to the car, the warm yellow light shining from the windows of the red brick house behind me. I didn't look back. But I didn't hurry either. I knew that door behind me was truly unlocked now. Almost 2 weeks passed before I saw Fiona again. In that time, I went to work, picked up Ella, tidied Oliver's always cluttered desk, ordinary days, as flat and cool as a glass of water that had been sitting out, but it felt good going down. On the last Thursday of July, my mother called and asked me to come over. She'd cleared out the attic and found the showbox, the 2 letters Michael Hamilton had sent from Aberdeen, never opened. She wanted me to take them. When I got there, the letters were already on the kitchen table. The envelopes were yellowed, edges frayed, postmarks dated April and July 1988. The first had been posted when Fiona was just a month old, the second, in July, long after my mother had presumably burned the reply to the first. My mother pushed them towards me. "You take them to her," she said. "I've kept them unopened for 38 years, I don't want to open them now. If she wants to know what her birth father wrote, she can open them herself." I looked at the 2 envelopes. The paper was smooth and shiny from age, like river stones worn by water. I touched one gently, cool beneath my fingers. "Mum, you never once thought of opening them?" My mother leaned against the counter, absently wiping the same plate with a dishcloth. "I did, especially in the early years, lying awake at night. But later I realized, if I opened them, I'd know what he said, and then what? Life would still go on, your father would still drive his lorry. Those letters couldn't turn back time." I put the envelopes in my bag, not opening them. As I left, my mother called from behind the screen door, "When you see her, don't push her to read them. Just leave them there. She'll choose for herself." I said I understood. That evening I drove south along the A12 to Ipswich. July fields gleamed gold under the sun, a combine harvester moved slowly along a distant ridge. The wind through the window smelled of dry grass, a smell that reminded me of summer evenings riding in my father's truck. Grandma's old house was on a quiet lane west of Ipswich, a 2-story grey-white terrace, the paint peeling off the number plate. I parked under the lime tree at the end of the lane and walked to the door with my bag, pressing the bell. The door opened. Fiona wore a faded cotton dress, barefoot, her hair pulled back loosely. When she saw me, her expression passed through surprise, hesitation, and then an indescribable relief. "What are you doing here? Mum asked me to bring you something." I opened my bag to show the edges of the 2 envelopes. Letters from Michael Hamilton, 1988. Never opened. Fiona's gaze fixed on the envelopes, and she seemed frozen. She stood in the shadow between the doorframe and the screen door for nearly 10 seconds before stepping aside. "Come in." The old house seemed smaller than I remembered. The same worn velvet sofa, its armrests shedding foam. An upright piano stood against the wall, dust-layered. Fiona had clearly been living here for 3 months. A notebook and a ballpoint pen lay on the low table beside the sofa. "Sit down," she said, sweeping a few clothes off the sofa into a basket. "I'll get you some water." I sat on the edge of the sofa and placed the envelopes on the coffee table. Fiona brought 2 glasses of water, sat in the armchair opposite, set her glass on a coaster, and stared at the envelopes as if they were objects not to be touched lightly. "Go ahead," I said. "Mum says she won't read them. They're yours." Fiona picked up the April letter. Her fingers were trembling slightly. She turned it over twice, studying the postmark and address, then carefully pried open the glue with her fingernail. The old adhesive had long dried, and it gave easily. She slid out the letter inside, thin, cream-colored, folded into thirds. The paper crackled as she unfolded it. I didn't lean in, I just watched her face. At first it was tense, brows furrowed, as if deciphering unfamiliar handwriting. Then her forehead smoothed, her lips tightened once, twice. She read the first page, turned it over. The reverse had only 2 lines. She stared at those 2 lines for a long time, then laid the paper flat on her knee and dropped her head. I heard her sniff. She didn't sob, she just sat there, her thumb rubbing the bottom right corner where the signature was, faded brown ink. "Nice handwriting," she said, her voice hoarse. "Better than Dad's, better than Peter's." I took a sip of water. "What did it say?" She turned the letter towards me. I took it and read it. The script was neat and elegant, with that rounded cursive common in the 1980s. The letter was brief. Michael said he'd found an apprenticeship repairing organs in Aberdeen, living in a room behind the church. He said he couldn't stay because he himself had grown up without a father and was afraid he wouldn't know how to be one. He said Diana was the strongest woman he'd ever met, and he wasn't worthy of her. At the end he wrote, "If one day the child wants to know where she came from, tell her that her father was the worst organ maker in Scotland, but the only thing he ever did right was to meet her mother." Fiona, that line, "the only thing he ever did right," what did she say? I handed the paper back. She took it and read it again, then pressed it against her chest, closed her eyes, and sank back into the armchair. The room fell quiet. A pigeon cooed outside in the lime tree. "I asked around, about him," she said, still eyes closed. "He later married, but had no children of his own. After his wife died a couple of years ago, he lived alone outside Aberdeen, and apparently not many people saw him off. His cousin said he kept a photo by his bedside, couldn't make out who it was, but on the back was written a date, March 1988. That was the month Fiona was born." "Fiona." I set down my glass and leaned forward. "I'm not here to defend Mum. She'll explain herself in her own time. I'm here to give you these because I think you have a right to know. How you process it, that's your business." Fiona opened her eyes. They were red, but the tears didn't fall. "Hannah," she said, my name followed by a long pause. "Do you hate me?" I looked at her. She sat in Grandma's old armchair, her hair short, thinner, the proud edges of her face softened. She no longer looked like the woman who'd pushed the report across the table. She looked more like the child born in March 1988, thrown about by fate. "I did," I said. "Easter Sunday was the worst. When you went after Ella, I wished you would disappear from that table. Then I saw you were already disappearing. You quit your job, gave up your flat, hid yourself here. You were no longer a threat." The hate slowly faded, and what was left was just exhaustion. Fiona looked down and folded the 2 letters back into their envelopes. "Before I left, I went back to the house once," she said. stood by the vegetable patch, looking at the bean trellises. Mum's beans, every summer they cover the whole wall, and I used to pick them every year from primary school. Standing there that day, I thought, why did I have to test that strand of hair? Why couldn't I just be the person who helps pick the beans? I paused. Because you grew up believing that if you didn't fight, you'd have no place. Mum called you the cleverest child, you believed that. Clever meant you had to win, and if you weren't winning, the whole game collapsed. Fiona laughed bitterly. You see right through me. I've watched you for 35 years, I said. If I couldn't see through you by now, I'd be blind. That evening I stayed for over an hour. She showed me an old photo album she'd found in Grandma's things, my mother as a young woman, in her early 20s, standing at the door of the Thetford diner in her white apron, laughing freely. I'd never known my mother could laugh like that. Fiona pointed to the street behind her in the photo and said, "Look, no traffic lights then." When I left, she walked me to the lime tree at the lane's end. The sun had dipped below the roofline, the sky was a thin blue-grey. She stood by the car, hands in the pockets of her cotton dress, her short hair stirring in the breeze. "Hannah," she said, "next time I come, could I see Ella? Not to do her hair, just to say hello." I opened the car door and looked back at her. "You can ask her yourself. She won't hold grudges, she's only 6. Fiona nodded, standing under the lime tree as I started the engine. In the mirror I watched her shrink into the dusk, then turn into the lane of grey-white houses and disappear. At the start of August, the heat finally eased for a few days. Ella's play scheme organised a farm visit, and Oliver was the guide. When I picked her up that afternoon, she was clutching a white feather she'd found in the barn, from the nicest calf. On the way home, she asked from the back seat, "Mummy, today I saw a cow with a calf. The calf's colour was different from the mother, it was white." "That's a Charolais," I said, glancing in the rear-view mirror. "Their coats are lighter when they're young." "Then why is that one different from all the others?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say. Oliver glanced at me, then answered for me, "Because every cow is different. Colour doesn't mean you're not family, colour is just colour." Ella considered this, seemed satisfied, and turned to look out the window. I sat back, my fingers curled in my lap, a complex warmth rising in my chest. Oliver's colour is just colour had, in one simple phrase, dissolved what had troubled us for months. That night, after Ella was asleep, I was sitting in the living room with the old paperback when Oliver came in from the workshop, showered, and sat beside me in his bathrobe. "You went to Ipswich this afternoon?" "Yes. Mum asked me to bring the letters." "Did she read them?" "Yes." "She didn't cry for long, just a few tears." Oliver lifted my feet onto his lap and began massaging my ankles, his after-late shift habit, now automatic. "And you," he said, working the muscles, "did you read them?" "Yes. Michael wrote that line, he was the worst organ maker in Scotland. I'd quite like to hear what his organ playing sounded like." Oliver chuckled. "Next time we're up in Aberdeen, maybe we'll find the church where he worked. Perhaps the organ still sounds like him." I looked up. "You'd think of that. I've been married to you for 7 years, he said. "I think about your things." I pulled my feet away, slid over, and leaned against his shoulder. He still smelled faintly of soap. Outside, the oak rustled, a train whistle sounded from the south of town. "Oliver. Thank you for not asking questions that day at the table." He looked down, his chin resting on my head. "Which day?" "Easter. You read the report, asked you knew." I said hers, not yours. "And you stopped. You trusted me." His arm tightened around me. "When have I ever not trusted your word?" I buried my face in his shoulder and said nothing. By mid-August, Fiona actually came back to Thetford. She texted me in advance, saying she'd be in the town park on Thursday afternoon, and if convenient could I bring Ella. I replied, yes. On Thursday afternoon I picked Ella up from school and went straight to the park, a small community park next to the Anglican church, with an old swing and a row of worn wooden benches. Fiona was already sitting on a bench, in a light blue short-sleeved shirt, holding a coffee. Ella spotted her from a distance and slowed, looking up at me. I knelt and straightened her collar. Do you want to go say hi to Auntie? Ella hesitated for 2 seconds, then ran over. She stopped in front of Fiona, hands behind her back, looking up at the thinner, shorter-haired aunt. Fiona knelt, set her coffee on the bench, and brought herself to Ella's eye level. Ella, long time no see. Where did you go, Auntie? Ella asked, with pure curiosity, not reproach. I went to stay in a different place for a while, Fiona said. Now I'm back. Ella pulled her hand from behind her back. In her palm lay the little pink Elsa brush. The plait you did last time came undone the next day. Mummies always fall out, yours are tighter. Fiona's eyes reddened sharply. She took a breath, reached for the brush, and ran her fingers over the bristles. Then, shall I do it again for you? Ella nodded firmly and turned her back. Fiona knelt on the grass in front of the bench and slowly brushed the pale gold hair from the crown down, with gentle strokes that made hardly any sound. I stood a few yards away on the grass, watching. The swing swayed in the breeze, the church pigeons flapped up and settled back on the tower. The sunset slanting past the spire cast long shadows of the two figures. When Fiona finished, she patted Ella's shoulder. Ella turned, felt the plait, smiled, and ran back to me, taking my hand. Fiona stood, still holding the brush, and walked towards me. I'll wash it and bring it back in a couple of days. No rush, I said. She's used to it, she'll make a fuss if it's lost. Fiona nodded. Behind her were the grey stone wall of the church and the cold coffee on the bench. She opened her mouth to speak. I waved a hand. Don't bother. She closed her mouth and smiled, faintly, but it was the first truly relaxed expression I'd seen on her since Easter. That evening, over dinner, Ella reported to Oliver, Daddy, Auntie did my hair today, tighter than Mummy. Oliver raised an eyebrow at me. Then Mummy needs to up her game. I tapped his hand with my chopsticks. Whose side are you on? Oliver whisked the carrot from Ella's bowl into his own and said, deadpan, I'm on the carrot side. I don't get involved in women's affairs. Ella giggled. The warm yellow ceiling lamp cast our three shadows on the wall. Outside, September hadn't arrived, but the evening breeze already carried a hint of autumn. I chewed a piece of potato and thought that the rest of the year would be all right. September came, and Ella started primary school. That morning I woke half an hour early, dressed her in the new uniform, white shirt, navy skirt, a dark red striped tie at the collar. She sat on the edge of her bed, swinging her legs, while I did her hair. I hesitated over the pink Elsa brush, then put it back in the drawer and used a plain black band instead. Oliver leaned in the doorway with his coffee, watching. Why aren't you using that brush? Her aunt said she'd wash it and return it, I said, tucking Ella's wisps behind her ears. I'll use this for now. Ella looked at herself in the mirror, tilted her head. Mummy, will Auntie come to see me off today? She didn't say so, I said, handing her the backpack. But if she wants to come, she knows which school you're in. Ella nodded, didn't press, and ran downstairs for her shoes. Oliver followed, and as he passed me he murmured, You said you weren't thinking she'd come, but you were. I didn't deny it. That morning the sky was clear, September sky so blue it seemed transparent. I walked Ella along the beach-lined pavement through the town centre, fallen leaves swirling at our feet. At the school gate, other parents and children milled about. Ella spotted her friend Millie, let go of my hand, and ran off. I stood outside the iron gate and watched her walk into the building with her star-printed backpack. At the entrance she turned and waved. I raised my hand in return, and then she disappeared round the corner. I waited a couple more minutes, watching other parents depart. When I turned, I saw Fiona. She was standing under the beech tree across the road, holding a manila envelope. When she saw me look, she crossed over and handed it to me. The brush, she said. Washed and dried. I opened it. The pink Elsa brush lay clean, no hairs left on the bristles. I closed the envelope and nodded. Thanks. Did she go in? Fiona nodded towards the school. Just now. First day. Does she know I'm here? She said if you wanted to come, you'd know where her school is. Fiona's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but a stiff muscle finally finding its way to relax. I'll come see her again next week, she said, if that's okay. I studied her. She wore a dark green sweater, her hair had grown a bit since July, just covering her ears. No makeup, but her color was better, the purple shadows under her eyes had faded. How are you doing? I asked. Fiona was quiet for a moment. I help out at the charity shop 3 days a week. Reverend Bennett set it up, said it would help me transition. They need someone to sort donations. I organize clothes by size and season. Slow work, but no one rushes me. That's good, I said. Slow is fine. Hannah. Yes. She looked down at her scuffed trainers, their edges frayed. I've never done anything this slow before. As an accountant, every quarter had deadlines, every day was a rush. Now I fold a shirt, put it on the shelf, look at it, and if it's wrinkled, I fold it again. She looked up, and her eyes held something that almost made my heart soften. It's the first time in my life I feel like I don't have to prove anything. I reached out and touched her forearm, lightly, just for a second. That shirt's lucky, you folded it twice. Fiona actually laughed, a real laugh, tiny creases appearing at the corners of her eyes. Go on, I have to open the shop. She turned and walked towards town, then stopped and said over her shoulder, I'll let you know before I come next week. Okay. She walked away. The beach shadows shifted, September sunlight scattered on the pavement in swaying patches. I put the envelope in my bag and headed home. That evening, Ella burst in and threw herself on the sofa to tell Oliver about her new friend, and about the class goldfish named Crisp because when the teacher asked for name suggestions she'd yelled Crisp and the whole class voted for it. Oliver nodded gravely and said Crisp was a much better name than Lightning. I was in the kitchen, prepping dinner, listening to their voices, and my chopping slowed. The kettle boiled, sending steam against the window, misting the glass. One rainy day in mid-September, on my way to work, I got a call from my father Peter. He rarely called, usually my mother relayed messages. His voice came through the speaker, low and rough from 31 years behind a wheel. Hannah, can you come by after your shift tonight? I'm on my own. Where's Mum? She's gone to Ipswich to see your sister. Fiona hurt her back yesterday moving boxes at the charity shop. Your mother went to check on her. Bad? Probably not, but your mother worries. He paused. Come and sit a while. Bring Ella and Oliver. I made oxtail soup. I hung up, standing in the staff room for a moment. My father never cooked unless forced. When Mum wasn't home, he'd live on sandwiches or tinned soup. He'd made oxtail soup because he wanted company. That evening the rain had stopped, the road reflecting wet streetlights. Oliver drove, Ella hummed in the back. I watched the washed fields through the passenger window. At my parents', the kitchen smelled of soup. My father wore an old apron over his clothes, stained with dried grease, probably from the garage. I lifted the lid. The meat was tender, carrots unevenly cut, but the broth was clear. I tasted it, seasoning just right. Dad, when did you learn to make soup? Your mum taught me, he said, stirring. She said never lift the lid too often, otherwise the steam escapes and the flavor goes. That's all I remember. Ella was already in the living room, digging through old toys. Oliver sat at the table and helped set out bowls. As my father ladled the soup, I watched his profile, his hair completely white, his back slightly stooped, the old scar on his wrist from a steel cable at the dock still visible. He placed 4 bowls on the table and sat in his usual chair. We ate like we used to, no Fiona, no arguments, no DNA reports. Just the soup steam and Ella's chatter. Afterwards, Ella played with my father's old torch. Oliver stayed with her in the living room. I was doing the dishes when my father came in, stood beside me at the sink, and held a cup of tea. Your sister called your mother yesterday, he said. She said her back wasn't serious, and she said the people at the charity shop are nice. The way she spoke, it was different. How? He drank some tea, thinking. Before, when she called, she'd talk about how busy she was, what she'd achieved, what she planned to do. Yesterday she just said her back hurt, that she'd made porridge, that she'd found a nice old coat at the shop she might buy. Small things. Small things are good, I said, setting a plate upside down on the drainer. Small things don't need hiding. My father looked at me. I knew that look. It was the same as when he'd put the tadpole jar on top of the fridge, and later found it gone, a little sad, but accepting. You've always been one to hold things in, he said. Your mother used to say you had a heavy heart. But I came to think, a heavy heart isn't bad, heavy hearts don't go astray. Your sister's different, too light, blown off course by the slightest wind. Dad, I said, drying my hands on my apron, how long have you known about her? He lowered his eyes, set his cup on the counter edge. From the first look. The color of her hair at birth, it wasn't a Davies shade. I'd been on the road 30 years, I'd seen more people than you. That reddish brown with that wave, only a few bloodlines in all of Britain have it. He paused. I only learned his name was Michael last month. All those years I never asked your mother for a name, I didn't need to. You never asked her. Why would I? He picked up the dishcloth and folded it, square and neat. Your mother is my wife, your sister is my daughter, and you are my daughter. All three are with me. What someone else was called, that has nothing to do with me. I watched his hands, knobby knuckles, permanent oil under his nails. He folded the cloth, set it by the sink, and went back to the living room to watch Ella play with the torch.